There's a general election coming up. Here's why I'll be voting Labour. Obviously, the NHS is a key issue for many voters in this election. It's on its knees as a result of £20 billion in government cuts between 2010 and 2015, with a further £22 billion cuts in the pipeline. The Tories clearly can't be trusted with the NHS despite all their empty bluster about 50,000 more nurses, despite 19,000 of them being existing staff, and 40 new hospitals. It's actually rebuilding 6 existing hospitals. On top of that, there's overwhelming evidence to suggest a severe risk of privatisation. Donald Trump said in a press conference that everything would be on the table in a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States. The leaked documents revealed by Jeremy Corbyn suggest that US markets are seeking to negotiate the cost of medicines and lengthening patents, which could result in pharmaceuticals costing 2.5 times as much as they do currently. On top of that, Dominic Raab co-authored a pamphlet advocating for the privatisation of the NHS, as did Jeremy Hunt. Boris Johnson himself has gone on record calling for the breakup of what he calls a monopolistic, monolithic NHS. Labour have pledged a £26 billion real terms healthcare funding boost, providing safe quality care, recruiting thousands of staff needed, rebuilding crumbling facilities and providing modern state-of-the-art equipment. They've also promised to remove all traces of privatisation and keep American markets well away. It's not just the NHS though. Most schools in England are set to be worse off next year than they were in 2015. Only 18 constituencies will get real-term per-pupil funding rises in 2020. 13 of these are in Conservative-held constituencies. I use schoolcut.org.uk to discover that my local school is set for a shortfall of £330,000 next year if the Tories remain in power. That's a loss of £640 per pupil. I see the toll these cuts have taken when I speak to my brilliant teacher friends. It's heartbreaking to hear how they and the children they teach are being affected by school budgets continuously being slashed. Labour plan to increase school funding by £10.5 billion by 2022 to 23, scrapping tuition fees and introducing a limit of 30 pupils per primary school classroom. On top of that, the Tories have cut police numbers by over 20,000 since 2010, so their pledge to put 20,000 more on the streets doesn't even make up for the amount they cut in the first place. A study by Greenpeace shows that the Tories are among the worst parties for climate change policies. Hardly surprising given their support for polluting industries such as aviation, oil and gas, and the fact that their manifesto was written by a fracking lobbyist, and the fact that Boris Johnson declined to attend the Channel 4 climate debate, which David Attenborough described as shameful. He's also still to allow himself to be interviewed by Andrew Neil, a bit rich for someone who was recently in the business of calling the leader of the opposition a chicken. Conversely, Labour planned to launch a new Green Deal, in order to reduce a substantial majority of the UK's emissions by 2030. A new Clean Air Act and vehicle scrapping scheme to reduce pollution levels, as well as an extra £5.6 billion for flood defence. Ever since the result of the 2016 EU referendum, the Tories have only catered to the 51.9% of voters who voted to leave. On the flip side, the Lib Dems only seem to care about the 48.1% who voted Remain by pledging to revoke Article 50. Both of these parties are dismissing half of those who voted in that referendum. Labour seek a solution that reflects the closeness of that result by negotiating their own deal with the EU and putting it back to the people, along with the option to remain. According to a UN report, poverty created by austerity has inflicted great misery upon the UK. Since the Tories came into government in 2010, child poverty in working families increased to 2.9 million cases, an increase in 38%. Food bank demand has increased by 3,800%. Official figures state there's been a 165% increase in rough sleeping, although homeless charities claim the number is much higher. More than 2,300 people have died after the DWP's work capability assessment deemed them able to work, and 400,000 families are worse off under universal credit, leaving many with £580 less to live off a year. Labour would introduce a right to food to end Food Bank Britain. They would aim to halve food bank usage within a year and remove the need for them altogether within 3 years. They'd scrap universal credit, the benefit cap and the 2-child limit. Work capability and personal independence payment assessments for those with a disability would end. They'd promise an end to raising the retirement age beyond 66 and maintain a triple lock on pensions. A majority of UK media hate Jeremy Corbyn. The Centre for Research in Communication and Culture at Loughborough University found that Labour receive a substantial deficit in positive to negative news coverage. On the other hand, the Tories receive more positive and negative coverage across all newspapers. I wonder why. Could it be that the majority of the UK press are owned by billionaires? These rich bastards are desperate to keep Labour out of power, because under a Labour government they would have to pay their fair share of tax, whilst the Tories plan to hand out £100 billion in tax giveaways over the next 3 years. That's why the billionaires who own the bulk of the UK media relentlessly target Corbyn with increasingly ridiculous and unfounded smears, despite him being a lifelong campaigner for social justice and constantly being on the right side of history. And don't get me started on the BBC. Even if Labour can't deliver on everything they promise in their manifesto, then you can give them a good kicking at the next election. At least give them a chance to right some of the historic wrongs of the last 9 years of Conservative government, because we clearly can't go on as we are.
Vote for free broadband and must-be competition. Vote for better investment into our nation. Vote for the wealthy to finally pay their due. Vote for the many, not the few.